Cárdenas and Machiavelli. You ready? So, why do I think that Niccolò Machiavelli is a big deal? Why do I think that he warrants your attention? I think it's important for two reasons. One is the more obvious. Machiavelli really does reshape and remake. Let me let Ashley in. Reshape and reconfigure the very way that the Western psyche sees government and governance, and also the way the Western psyche uh, imagines the personal attributes necessary to the successful practitioner of the governmental arts, the politician. Before Machiavelli, most people, including literate, intelligentsia, noble people, aristocrats, most people don't give a lot of thought to the structure of government because there's a king and that's just the way it is, nor necessarily to the personality, the personal skills, the psychology, the types of things that would be written in a job description, right? The successful candidate for this position will possess the following qualities, and then they list them, right? Being able to work with a team, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? Think outside the pinchy box, all of these things, right? Nobody had, very few people had really given thought to, well, gee, I wonder what the successful attributes of a good politician ought to be. If for no other reason, then there was no use to think about things like that because nobody had a say in who the politician is, right? Because the king was almost always who? What was their one qualification on their resume? They were the oldest surviving son of their dad, King so-and-so. So why even contemplate what it might take for a good king to hold on to power? Machiavelli introduces the frame of reference for us to even think of such things. Just as Plato introduces the otherworldism as a frame of reference to make sense of things in this world, particularly those things that don't appear to make a lot of sense, right? Well, this doesn't make sense in this world because it's actually created and governed by some force in this other world, right? Whether that force is the good or God or Yahweh, Allah. The other reason why I think it's important for my students to have at least a basic understanding of who Machiavelli was, what the political advice that he hands down to us, is because perhaps now more than ever, Machiavelli and his realpolitik, right? Don't trouble me with the way things ought to be and the way politics ought to be. I ain't got no time for this. Let me tell you the way politics is, right? And let me explain to you the nature and contours of the modern puto known as the politician, right? And as we go through today and acquaint ourselves a little bit more with the type of political advice that Machiavelli gives to those who would be princes and kings and politicians, the way that he sees politics is not very different from the way that we see politics, and that's really the point. There's a strong argument to be made that we see politics the way that we see politics precisely because of the lens that Machiavelli gave us for the analysis of the political state and the political animal over 500 years ago. So Niccolò Machiavelli. Niccolò Machiavelli is a creature of Florence, It's the same Florence that is the birthplace of the Italian Renaissance, which is in full swing for most of Machiavelli's relatively short life. Machiavelli was born in 1469, maybe 20 years after the invention of the Gutenberg press, right? Typeset printing that makes it possible to pump out the Latin Bible in 3 days instead of maybe 2 months, depending on how fast the scribe is, right? Now you can pump out a Bible, almost always has to be in Latin, right? Unless you're doing it underground. Now you can pump out a Bible, maybe 2 days, I think is a little bit short. I understand it was closer to a week for the first couple of decades with this typeset printing, but still way faster than was ever possible by human hand. St. Augustine wrote 93 books, right? Imagine if he had a Gutenberg press. So Machiavelli is born into already a new world of at least emerging mass literacy. More and more people are beginning to read. More and more people are beginning to read things other than the Bible. More and more people are beginning to read even the Bible in languages other than Latin, especially if they're further away from the power of Rome in places like Germany, where, of course, the Protestant Reformation begins. In 1513, when Machiavelli is about 44 years old. He dies in 1527 at the age of 58. Machiavelli is known best for his for a relatively short work entitled *The Prince*, which is the subject of most of our inquiry. Certainly the object of most of Professor Smith's lecture that I assigned, and the second lecture, which I suggest to you if you have time. Of his other works, the other one, which is significantly remembered, certainly his second most famous, is also, I think, his longest work, which is Discourses on Livy. Discourses on Livy, L-I-V-Y, more commonly referred to as the Discourses. Who the hell was Livy, and why the hell is he writing discourses, or contemplations, right? Positions, thinking about Livy. Livy was a guy who wrote one of the accepted authoritative works on the history of the Roman Empire, right? In like 2 centuries prior to Machiavelli. So in Machiavelli's time, there were 2 or 3 great authoritative books on the second most important thing in intellectual life. The first, of course, being the Bible, but secondary to the Bible was, of course, the Roman Empire, because it was the single biggest event in human history before the arrival and the worship of the Christ. And this guy Livy was one of the 2 or 3 great authors. Cicero was another, and I think Plutarch was the other. Cicero, Plutarch, and Livy, perhaps. Sounds like a law firm. Livy was one of the great authors on the Roman Empire, which then Machiavelli, as we will see, is compelled to deal with. What was Machiavelli's objective? Well, let's say that the Machiavellian project is, as I suggested, the introduction of a whole new way of looking at government and the people who practice it, particularly whoever is the big guy, the king, the prince, the president. Okay, so that is his project. But how does he think he's going to accomplish this? Well, he accomplishes this through 2 works, The Prince and the Discourses on Livy. The Prince is written in 1513. It's not published until his discourses of Livy, which were written in 1517. Was it 15? Yeah. The Prince in 1513, and then 4 years later, although we believe he was probably writing them both at about the same time. The Prince was finished in 1513. The Discourses was finished in 1517, the same year that Martin Luther begins the Protestant Reformation in what is now Germany. Both the Prince and the Discourses, this is not a commonly understood thought or fact, both the Prince and the Discourses were not published formally until 1531, several years after Machiavelli perishes. But we know that the Prince, by the time Machiavelli dies in 1527, is already a big deal, because while it hasn't been formally published, he had like a private small collection that was published and bound that he shared with some of his closest friends. And so this is a part of the mystique of Machiavelli. Machiavelli's way of understanding politics is significantly forged in the 1500s, not by people who actually read either of his two major works on the subject, but by reading about or hearing about people who said that they read Machiavelli, because they weren't published till after he was dead. Even the Prince, he only published maybe a couple of dozen of copies. So the Prince and the unprecedented, and to many people's thinking, absolutely diabolical, even evil. Many people thought that Machiavelli was he was referred to as the Prince of Darkness. In fact, that some say that is actually where the term, the Prince of Darkness, comes from. That Machiavelli was actually an evil person doing the bidding of evil when he writes the Discourses and the Prince, because what he is doing is he is suggesting to us that not only is it okay, but the optimal way to practice politics, the optimal way to get power and to hold on to power, is to tolerate, if not actually embody, evil. And so, to some extent, some of what Machiavelli actually writes in his in these two works are overstated by people for generations, actually, precisely because he was branded, if you will. Let me put it in these terms. He's branded by other people and not necessarily by people who actually read his work, right? So it's like a company being branded on the basis of their product's reputation, not on the basis of what people actually think of the product who actually bought the product, if that makes any sense, right? So Yelp creates a brand, right? This mystique about this restaurant. But what people are believing about this restaurant from Yelp may have little relation to the actual experience of eating in this particular restaurant. Does that make any sense? Am I making it totally obvious that I really need to get to a restaurant? I'm sick and tired of being under the lockdown. Now, having said all of that, I don't want to suggest that Machiavelli was not, in a profoundly mind-blowing way, mind-blowing, because he was. And he knew he would be. He intended it so. Machiavelli describes himself in The Prince itself as being, in fact, he basically starts out The Prince by saying, y'all ain't never seen nothing like this before. Hold on tight, because what Columbus did for our ability to reimagine the world, right? I am going to do for our ability to reimagine the world in a different way. And so he literally compares himself to Columbus, who of course comes back from the New World when Machiavelli is a young man of about 23. So he grows up in this new world, this new modernity. In fact, Professor Smith is hardly the only person in our time to suggest that Machiavelli can be thought of as the first person of the modern world, as the progenitor of modernity itself. And so Machiavelli says that he is going to create a new continent, just as Columbus discovered a new continent. But in Machiavelli's sense, it's not a new physical continent that he is discovering for us. What he is doing is he is taking the European continent that we have all, contemporaries of his time, we have all been born into, and he is stripping off. He is stripping off the fabric of lies and imagination and bullshit that has been layered over the Western psyche ever since at least Plato, and then after him, Aristotle, and Jesus, and Paul, and Augustine, and Aquinas. For Machiavelli to make a whole new world for us, he knows that what he needs to do is he needs to delegitimate, dis and destroy, basically, the two main civilizational foundations prior to Machiavelli. That is, of course, the classical world, the Greeks, and the Christian world. And he does this early in the Prince by saying that what he will set out to do is to explain to us how to understand government and politics as they really are, and not as we have always wanted them to be. Machiavelli has devastating criticism for both Platonic classical thought, but also Augustinian Christian thought. And he's saying, look, whether you're into the Greek classics like Plato, or this Christian bullshit, whether it's written about by Augustine or Aquinas, you have to recognize that each of these two, which supposedly give us advice on how to live our life and how to construct governments and how to exist in a political society, each of these two imaginations are just that. They are imaginations of an ideal government which each tradition admits doesn't really exist. Plato never says in the Republic, oh, the Republic really exists, I'll take you there, right? Plato is very clear, no, the Republic is the ideal state. We may not even be capable of creating it because we're so tied down with our bullshit earthly obsessions like sex and drogas and bling. And then Machiavelli says implicitly, but I think it's very clear, which is what made him so dangerous, right? Perhaps there was a reason why this wasn't published while he was alive. He wanted to die of natural causes. Thank you very much. Because on the other hand, what he's also suggesting is this whole Christian thing that we've all bought into for the last 1,500 years. Recognize this is all built on this city of God, right? Which by definition doesn't exist here. So let me put it this way. With Plato, as an example, you have an anti-materialist, right? He's an otherworldist, right? Who believes that there is a purpose to the universe. The purpose of the universe is for our souls to create here, right, what it has a faint recollection of from true reality. Okay, that is the Platonic teleology, or telos, as Aristotle would later say. Aristotle is not an anti-materialist. He breaks from Plato. Aristotle is, of course, a materialist, but he's a materialist who believes that the universe has a purpose. And even inert objects, a rock, has its own telos, right? The telos of a rock is to decompose through wind and water principally until it is sand on the shores of a great beach. But everything's got its telos, right? So even Aristotle, the materialist, he still believes that there is some kind of a purpose, right? Then comes the Christian tradition, and you've got which are profoundly theological, right? That's the whole nature of the narrative. The reason that we are here, right, is to do in this world what it takes in order to hopefully, maybe, make it into the city of God. Tolerate the city of man so that we might make it into the city of God. And among the Christians, there are those who are more materialistic and less materialistic, okay? Augustine, I think it's fair to say, is less materialistic. Augustine says, yeah, this world exists, but it doesn't really matter. Aquinas later comes in, right? And being a pro-Aristotelian, Aquinas comes in and says, this world not only matters, but it matters more than Augustine said. It's still not nearly as important as the city of God, but this world does matter. And so it is right and righteous for us to use our reason, our Aristotelian reason, to investigate this world. Okay? While we are otherwise doing the things that the church tells you to do so that we can make it to heaven. You get this? Now we get what was perhaps inevitable. Now we get the materialist who believes that there's no purpose in the universe whatsoever. Now we get the modern man. The only thing that exists is the stuff that I can see, take, dominate, right? Break, eat, right? And there is no purpose. There's no purpose out there. There's no purpose in the universe, right? The only purpose that there is my will. That's Machiavelli. So when we hear sayings attributed to Machiavelli, because they certainly capture what Machiavelli wrote, even though Machiavelli didn't literally write them, we attribute them to Machiavelli because it just makes so much sense. Oh, this is a Machiavellian position. Well, and these two are, although he didn't literally write these. The one is might makes right. You ever hear that? Might makes right. What the hell does that mean? Don't tell me what right or wrong is. I don't give a shit. There may not even be a right or wrong, but I'll tell you this much. I can tell that this guy's army is better than that dude's army, okay? He's got more might. His might is mightier than this other guy's might be, okay? That much I can tell. Who's right or wrong? I don't know, right? But I'll tell you what, when the dust settles, I'll be able to tell you who the winner is. It will be the one who evidently was the mightier. That's a profoundly Machiavellian position, right? But the ethical question, the moral proposition, that's not the point. Even if there is such a thing as right, it can and perhaps should be undone by might. Will, particularly in a universe where there's where there is no other will, ain't no universal will, ain't no teleology, ain't no purpose, ain't no design, intelligent or otherwise, ain't no God. Now, I'm not saying Machiavelli goes so far as to say God is dead. A disciple of Machiavelli 300 years later by the name of Friedrich Nietzsche would become very, very famous by saying, well, let's face it, a lot of people in Europe were already saying by that time, God is dead. But what Machiavelli does is he refers to, he has this one point where he says, the problem with Europe and particularly Italy, he's an Italian, right? He's from Florence. So one of his great hang-ups is that Italy, after all, was the birthplace of the Roman Empire, Rome, right? And Italy, by the time Machiavelli is writing, has disintegrated into a bunch of city-states warring with each other, being manipulated by bigger states like France and Spain. So one of Machiavelli's points is, we used to be great. So that's part of his come from, right? Just like Mussolini in World War II would say, why am I aligning us with Hitler? Because Hitler, right, loves the old Roman Empire just like I do. And Hitler is promising us that Rome will once again be mighty under his international leadership. So it's this old imagination to reinvigorate the greatest hegemonic power in the history of hegemonic powers until arguably the United States, the Roman Empire. What is Machiavelli writing about? Just to pair it back to as he starts. How is he confining his discourse, that which he seeks to describe and to commend to us? Machiavelli argues there are really two forms of government. When you really strip it all down, there are two basic forms of government. One is the republic, and the republic, as opposed to a government of one, the autocrat. The republic generally is a government of the few. It's not a government of the many, right? That could be a democracy. It's not the government of the one, right? That's your Caesar or your Pharaoh, right? Or your Kim Jong-un. This is a government of the few. Elites, aristocrats, right? The masses may have some avenue of voice, right? But it's going to be through this class of noblemen, through these aristocrats, right? Through this Senate of elite Athenians, if you will, in that form of a democratic republic. So the republic is basically a government of the few. And that's just a very general proposition. And of course, within that, there could be all kinds of different types of republics. But generally speaking, it ain't a government of and by the people, right? Nor is it a government just of the one guy. Aside from the republic, there is the principality, which is government by the one guy. And so, makes sense, right? Okay, because we hadn't seen a government by the many other than Athens, right? And part of Machiavelli's point is, we see what happened to them. So you got your republics and you got your principalities. Now, what Machiavelli is saying is that what we're really concerned with is principalities for two reasons. One is that's basically all we've seen since the collapse of the Roman Empire. And B, because Machiavelli says a new type of principality is the future, especially if they take my Niccolò. So there's republics and there's principalities, and then he breaks it down. Within principalities, there's the old type of principality, right? Where the king is the king because he was his dad's oldest living son. That's your traditional oligarchy of the middle-aged feudal system, right? That basically emerges across Europe in the political vacuum of the collapse of the Roman Empire. But Machiavelli is seeing that there's something new going on. There's a new type of principality, right? A new type of government with one guy who has all the power. And it is increasingly not the king who was his daddy's son. It's the king who conquered another land. It's the king who emerges from a republic, of which there were a number throughout Italy, that then collapses, if you will, implodes into a ruler by one. And so just quickly, kind of the political backdrop, and Smith talked about this. the reality that Machiavelli is growing up in, serving in government, and writing from once he's exiled from government, and writes in exile his two masterpieces, The Discourse and The Prince. Italy is now a bunch of city-states, okay? Like Florence and Milan. The Vatican has its own. France becomes a significant power, right? Just to the northwest of Italy. Spain, further to the west, right, across the Aegean. Spain is becoming also a very significant power. The Spaniards in 1492, under the union of Ferdinand and Isabella, finally drive out the remnants of about 780 years of Muslim rule, right? They finally drive them out of southern Spain, Andalusia. And so a few months after they finally drive them out in early 1492, Isabella goes to her husband by this arranged political marriage, Ferdinand, and says, okay, we won, they're gone. Columbus is still saying, hey, can we finance this gig? I think we ought to do it. Ferdinand agrees with her, and they do it, okay? So Columbus comes back, and even though he's Italian, and even though he went to the Portuguese to finance his gig first, and they turned him down, Columbus goes back to his sugar mama and his sugar daddy, Isabella and Ferdinand, and says, I'm back. Here are some indigenous people / slaves, and here are some gold and silver, right? What can we do with a business model that is fueled by slave labor and unprecedented levels of precious metals, right? So Spain, because of the influx of gold and silver that's coming into Spain, Spain is becoming a real power. Remarkable rise, given that 20, 30 years earlier, Spain wasn't even Spain. They were still, at least southern Spain, Andalusia, was still laboring under the government of Muslim clerics, or the Moors, M-O-O-R-S, like Alhambra High School, the Moors, right? Okay. So Machiavelli looks at these proud Italian city-states being manipulated by Spain and France, because France wants to dominate Italy as a counterweight against growing Spanish influence. Spain knows that the only way that they can deal with the pre-existing strength of France is to gain allies among this fractured group of Italian city-states. And so Machiavelli looks across the once proud Italy, the seat of the Roman Empire, and says, we're all just pawns being pushed around by these Spaniards and these French, right? And so Machiavelli is looking for a new business model, a new type of governmental model that will enable Italy or various Italian city-states to once again rise and to at least approximate the glory of the Roman Empire. And it occurs to him that Greek classical thinking and Christian / Catholic thinking is not going to do it. That in fact, it is these beliefs in worlds that don't exist that is what is keeping Europe, and particularly his beloved Italy, down. And the future of political glory, particularly Italian political glory, lies with the great man, the great leader, the great strong guy, the great autocrat, the great authoritarian, the prince. And so this becomes Machiavelli's project. You get that? So I'm arguing that Machiavelli believes that the Republic is a good form of government, but not right now. That for the new prince, right, to establish a new principality, you can't do it. you can't do it with democratic errors. You can't do it with Christian love. You have to do it with power. You have to do it with strength. You have to do it, in other words, with absolutely uncompromising violence. And so, because he knows that the whole Christian pathos, the hook, if you will, certainly since Paul and Augustine, right? The great competitive advantage of Christianity is this brotherly love thing, right? Oh, Machiavelli knows that he needs to deal with this, and so what he's saying is that one of the metaphors that he uses is he speaks of the types of leaders that have succeeded in the past, and therefore we should be modeled after that, and the type of leaders who have failed in Machiavelli's eyes, okay? And so Machiavelli says, basically, you can reduce all great leadership types to two types. One, there's the armed prophet, and then there's the unarmed prophet. Do you remember that from the Smith discussion? The armed prophet and the unarmed prophet. And so what Machiavelli says is that all of the armed prophets, and he lists them, they're mostly Roman Caesars from back in antiquity. He said the armed prophets prevailed and the unarmed prophets all failed. Now here's an example of how Machiavelli seeks to undercut and delegitimize Christianity. But he can't do it by attacking Christianity head on, right? I mean, after all, he lives in Italy. This is a profoundly Catholic country. He's in Florence, only a few hundred miles away from Rome. So he can't call out the church directly. And so what he does is he just says, unarmed prophets fail. And he goes on to say that the problem in Europe and in Italy in particular is that for the last 1,500 years or so, we have had, he calls our religion, he refers to our religion, and he capitalizes them, right? He won't say Christianity or Catholicism, right? He doesn't want the Pope's guards coming for him. He says our religion has kept us down. Why? Because he says it has made us effeminate, right? You get this? So in a profoundly male-dominated misogynistic world, right? Back then, even more than it is now, right? He's calling out the church in about the worst way that anybody could. He's saying that the church has made us effeminate. The church has made us like women. It's clear from Machiavelli's broader body of work. In a misogynistic world, he was a profound misogynist. He has these other quotes where he says that because he believes that there's no purpose in the universe, in the absence of purpose, there's just randomness, right? In the absence of a purposeful universe, there's just randomness. And so he uses the term fortune, right? It's just dumb luck, right? The universe is just a series of dumb luck, right? And so he says, how do you conquer fortune? How do you conquer a randomless universe, in other words, okay? And he says the way that you do that is the metaphor that you use, the analogy that you use, is that you imagine that the random universe that you need to conquer, right, is just like a woman. And so Machiavelli says, how do you conquer her? He says the same way you conquer a woman, basically with force, domination, and violence. That's Machiavelli. So at least inferentially, what he is saying is Jesus was a failure. He was one of the unarmed prophets, right? Because of his weakness, because he wasn't willing to take up arms, right? He was a failure. Now, I'm going to leave that part of Machiavelli's argument right where it is, because that's where he left it. Undeveloped, right? He didn't go on to explain how could it be that somebody who remade the world, right? I mean, you know, whether one posits the actual existence as a historical factual matter of Jesus or not, there was a whole Christian thing that was developed out of the alleged existence of this guy. And he has just called him, not by name, but certainly without question, that's who he's talking about. He has just called him the great failure. So at this point, right, you look, oh, how does Machiavelli explain this? This is a fascinating position to take. How is it that this guy, right, who remade the entire Western psyche from the inside out for well over 1,000 years, in many ways to this day, how is he a failure? Machiavelli doesn't explain. He just leaves it there. Machiavelli is trying to suggest to us that all of the great leaders throughout history have been those whose to quote a modern Machiavellian, Mao Zedong from the last century, all politics flows from the barrel of a gun. And so Machiavelli's point is, look, might really does make right. And so one of the points in history, this is really in the Discourses, where he uses the history of the Roman Empire to prop up his general argument, and particularly the one relating to the Prince in the book, The Prince. Machiavelli refers to the founding of Rome. Do you remember your ancient history? Remember how Rome was founded? There were these brothers, right? Romulus and Remus. Remember this? So Remus was more of a nice guy. We might look at him and say, hey, he's a pretty virtuous guy, right? I would trust him with my wallet if I had to, you know. Romulus was let's just say a very different type of guy. Romulus was more of a bruto, right? Romulus really wanted power. So did Remus, but Remus said that, you know, he wanted to do good things if they could create this new city-state. And Romulus basically said, fuck you. And he kills his brother Remus. He kills his brother Remus because Romulus believes that the only way to found this great state, right, is to do it himself. He knows best, right? To quote a contemporary politician, I know more than the generals know. So Romulus kills his brother, and through violence and brutality, forges the nascent emerging Roman city-state that then goes on to conquer Sparta and Athens and everything else. And then you have the Roman Empire. Well, Machiavelli's point is, what made Rome great once upon its time is the way that it was founded, right? People saw the strength of Romulus, right? And people interpreted Romulus's killing of his brother as being Romulus making the sacrifice of killing his brother for the good of the new Roman state. That Remus would have been bad for Rome. And so Romulus, as much as he loved Remus, loved the promise of what Rome could be. And so he killed his weak brother, right? And then forged through his own personal strength that his brother lacked. Through his own personal strength, he forged a strong and powerful Rome that would then go on and conquer the known world. And so Machiavelli says, that's leadership, baby, right? That's That's where it's at. Okay. Where's Remus now? I'll go dig up his body. Right? Fuck him. Machiavelli has this other innovation when it comes to political thought and good governance, which is also not exact, doesn't have a lot of precedent before. It's not to suggest by any means that the use of brutality and violence was not already a well-practiced technique of maintaining social order, much less of conquering new lands, right? But what Machiavelli does is he gives the brutality of the totalitarian despot a philosophical rationale. And in a way, it's very Platonic. Why must a leader from time to time commit atrocities? For the good of the state. Even when there's no external threat that might warrant the committing of violence and maybe, on a wild Saturday night, some atrocities. Even in the absence of that, Machiavelli says, every once in a while, you just got to shake up the state. And what he called is the state that lasts is the state that is formed in strength, i.e. violence. And so Machiavelli says, for the state to remain stable, for the state to perpetuate itself, is to do what Rome, knowingly or unknowingly, did for over 1,000 years. And that is every once in a while, occasionally, right? You just got to bust out the batons and bust some heads. You got to shake up society, because every once in a while, because the longer that there's peace and stability, the longer that those who wish the king ill, the longer that they have to plot his overthrow. Now follow this, okay? This is fascinating thinking. Machiavelli says that every once in a while, the prince, right, needs to shake up society, his own society, with violence in order to fight off corruption. Now, this is where we get into some of the intricacies of Machiavellian thought, which is another way of saying, here we begin to expose ourselves and to begin to try to understand some of the arguments that have driven leaders throughout time, including in recent, even current history. Why do leaders do the quote unquote bad things that they do? Machiavelli says, the most important thing for the state is its own survival. Okay? So stability is absolutely key. But stability doesn't mean same old thing year after year after year, because the more that you have peaceful stability, the longer time people who want to take down the prince, the longer that they have the time and the occasion and the building of coalitions and plots, right, to take him down. And so that is corruption. So to Machiavelli, corruption is not the king taking the people's wealth from them, right, and hoarding it onto himself. That's not corruption, okay? Corruption is anything that threatens the stability of the state, right? So think of it this way. It's almost analogous to, and in the imaginations of other political imaginations, like fascism in the context of Adolf Hitler's Third Reich, the analogy would be to the state as organism. The state as a living thing whose life at all costs must be protected. It's like the queen bee must be preserved, okay? And so everyone has their station in life. And ultimately, everybody's a role in society is to directly or indirectly, right, support the perpetuation and the continuance of the great organism, the queen bee, the state, right? So since Machiavelli doesn't necessarily believe in right or wrong, right? What's might makes right. And what's the right thing to do? Well, the mighty thing. Well, what's the mighty thing, right? Well, I'll turn your other cheek and I'll show you now. The only thing that's corrupt is a threat to the state. A threat to the stability and the continuation of the state is by definition corrupt. There is no other form of corruption. Why? Because there's no such thing as right or wrong. Why is there no such thing as right or wrong? Because there's no order in the universe. There's no telos in the universe. There's no purpose. There's no lawgiver. There's only will. And the state must will its continuation. And the prince is there because he is the great agent of will to perpetuate, right, and enlarge the state. So that's corruption. It has nothing to do with right or wrong. It has to do with, are you a threat to the state? You must die. So now then the question for Machiavelli becomes, okay then, who are the corruptors? And Machiavelli's answer is, well, it could be anybody, but let's face it, if it were the common folk, the poor folk, who cares? Because they ain't got the power to hurt the king. Machiavelli's point is the real corruption comes from those who can hurt the prince, and that is from the noblemen, the aristocrats, right? All the people in society who have any meaningful power whatsoever, other than the king or the prince or the president himself. So Machiavelli establishes classes of power, if you will. There's the king, prince, president. There's the aristocracy or the bureaucracy, the intelligentsia, right? The bureaucrats, those guys. And then at the bottom of the pyramid, right, the third class is the masses. And what Machiavelli is saying is that as long as the king can continue to manipulate the masses, largely through the use of religion. By the way, I didn't mean to suggest that Machiavelli thought that religion was bad. He thought that religion was groundless. It's not grounded in anything because there ain't no God. There ain't no universe, telos, there ain't no purpose. But he knows it's a thing. And so Machiavelli says the smart prince, the one who will survive and last, is the one who uses religion to fortify his power. And so understanding the masses to be religious, right? Then the role and the challenge and the skill of the prince is to appear to be religious without being religious, to appear to be pious without being pious. Given that the masses, quite apparently, must continue under the delusion that there is purpose in the universe and that they stand for goodness. And in the Christian universe, the creator of the telos is also the originator of the goodness, right? That's how Christianity brings the whole Platonic and Aristotelian thing together, right? And Machiavelli knows this, he gets this. But what Machiavelli is saying is that doesn't mean it's real. It's practiced, but it ain't grounded in reality, right? Machiavelli comes very close to saying, because there ain't no God. But since they continue to believe it, and they quite evidently, from time to time, have proven themselves to be willing to die for it, use it. So make sure that the people see you to be pious. They see you to be religious, okay? You want them to see you that way, because there are going to be times when you're going to ask them, you're going to need to ask them for the good of the state to do things that are going to be very, very difficult, like rise up against the aristocrats who are beginning to threaten your authority. Do you see what I'm saying? So what Machiavelli is saying is that just as Rome needed to be formed through violence, every once in a while, the state, right, the state that's going to last, needs to emulate the Roman state and occasionally shake its society up with violence by the prince appealing to the masses that there's some kind of a plot, right, in Congress or in the Senate or among the university professors, right? Whatever class it is that is beyond the masses, right, is close to the king and has at least some power, some influence in society. Those are the pockets of corruption that the king needs to weed out. And they're just going to metastasize like a cancer every once in a while. And that's when the king needs to shake things up, reform the great society, right? You form it through violence and you reform it. You form it all over again through violence, right? And you instigate, if you must, a rising up among the masses, not against you. You're the king, you're one of them, right? They must never rise up against you, but against these other guys who the masses really don't understand anyways. The intelligentsia, the journalists, right? The politicians, the judges, the lawyers, fuck the lawyers, all those guys, right? It's them. And so this is the point in The Prince at which Machiavelli asked the age-old question, is it better for a ruler to be loved or hated? And Machiavelli's answer is, of course, both. But if it's got to be one, you want to be feared. You want to be feared. You want to be feared because it's out of fear that the masses will move, right? If you are dependent on the loyalty of the masses because of their love for you, Machiavelli says love is fickle, right? Machiavelli asks kind of inferentially, how many of you have ever been in a totally monogamous relationship? Forever. And Machiavelli's like, I hear crickets in the distance. All right. I get you. I get you. Yo también, right? Whore. That's my point. Love is fickle, right? I love you, and I'll love you forever, unless and until, hey, what's that over there? Machiavelli said, fear though, fear. Fear done right, if you do fear the right way, it will never go away. So that's the delicate balance, or that's one of them that Machiavelli is painting out in The Prince, and fortified by various passages of the discourses. There's no order of the universe. Inferentially, there's no God. In the absence of that, the only thing that matters is will. The only thing that has ever happened in history out of this universal soup of randomness is somebody's will. Romulus had the will. Killed his brother, get the hell out of the way, and he forges a state, right? And so once you have taken power and you are now the prince, and again, this is not the old oligarchical model of you are your dad's oldest surviving son, that's why you're the king. Machiavelli knows that the world is changing, that the disintegration, the political disintegration that he's seeing in Italy with all of these individual city-states, he sees is going to happen throughout Europe. That people are getting tired of the divine right of kings. that we are beginning to see by this point in Europe some very ambitious men who don't have any royal blood, but they sure as hell want the power. And that's who Machiavelli's talking to. He's talking to the new prince who has no royal blood, cannot and doesn't even pretend to trace his heritage back to the will of God, right? But the new guy who may not necessarily believe in any God whatsoever, he simply believes in his own will. That is the new class of emerging politicians, or shall I put it, that is the new emerging class of politicos that Machiavelli is speaking to. And I suggest they've been listening to him for the last 500 years. Well, at least one other thing I wanted to point out about Machiavelli, because this gets to Machiavelli, the deep metaphysical type of analyst. He's not just a political animal. There's a depth to Machiavelli. I'm not saying it rivals Plato's or Aristotle's, but it shows that he's not just he's not just the political consultant that can craft a message for somebody. He's somebody who understands that underneath the message, there's a substrata of meaning. Machiavelli understands that what drives and what perhaps has always driven the imagination is something underneath the articulated. There's a deeper truth and a deeper reality undergirding it. And so when a political slogan comes along, right, it might kind of attract us, it might appeal to us, but then it kind of goes away. But another political slogan that sounds very similar and it sticks with us. And centuries later, people are saying it over and over and over, even though no one's pursuing it anymore. Something like "Workers of the world unite," that type of thing. Karl Marx, right? Workers of the world unite. Who's actively pursuing that now, right? But those words still resonate. And so I think Machiavelli has an understanding that politics that is at least grounded by philosophy is much more likely to be successful than politics which isn't grounded in a philosophy. Because a philosophically grounded politics, not that it's right or wrong, but a politics that at least purports itself to be grounded in something that speaks to our yearning for deeper meaning, that's the type of political ploy and political slogan that is more likely to resonate. So why do I suggest that Machiavelli, this political animal, who could thus be simply dismissed as a political animal, as just someone who's good with words, right? Why do I suggest he's not just that kind of a superficial marketeer? Because I think he's onto something deeper. Not saying he's right. I'm saying he's onto something deeper. At one point, so he's trying to describe how it is that the modern prince, no divine or royal bloodline, right? The modern prince who's got nothing but his, as that great philosopher of the last century, Tony Montana, said in that great philosophical work, Scarface, right? Hey, all I got in this world is my word and my balls, or words to that effect. Anyone remember that? Yeah, very well. So Machiavelli says this, quote, they, meaning early princes who wanted to take power, who later ended up being great leaders, right? They had nothing else from fortune than the opportunity which gave them matter, enabling them to introduce any form they please. I hope that sounds familiar, because Stephen Smith did give this particular quote some time in the 52 or shorter minute lecture that I asked you to take a look at. So I hope you took a look. You did look at that video, and you do remember this quote. They had nothing else from fortune than the opportunity which gave them matter, enabling them to introduce any form they please. Now again, when Machiavelli says fortune, what he means is he's referring to the state of the universe. There's no telos, there's no purpose, right? There's just random luck, good, bad, or otherwise. Everything's fucking random now. Okay? So he refers to that as fortune. Good fortune, bad fortune. It's just fortune. Ain't no purpose. It's fortune, right? That's his word for it. That's his placeholder. Okay, so he says it's out of this fortune. It's like out of this universal soup of randomness, right? This wannabe powerful king, right? Out of the randomness, he is given all the matter that he needs in order to create his own form and impose it onto the world. I'm paraphrasing. This is what Machiavelli, I believe, is saying. You get this? So the universe is random. Ain't no God, ain't no purpose. There's just us. You and me, right? And our word and our balls, our ganas, right? Are you good or not? And so out of this, right, the smart politician, right, who's hungering for power and is gonna have it, damn it. She knows all she needs is her will. That's all there really is. Her will and the other guy's will. Fuck the other guy, right? She's not fighting for them to have power, right? Her will. And that's the only matter. These are Aristotelian terms, matter and form. Remember that? Aristotle has 4 causes, right? The material causes matter. The formal cause is whatever shape it takes, right? And then the final cause, Machiavelli is saying, at least inferentially, there ain't no final cause. Fuck, that's telos, man. There's no purpose, right? But what's the third cause? What's the third cause? Come on, class. Yeah, that's right. It's the efficient cause. So what is the efficient cause for Machiavelli? That's right. The politician herself. Out of randomness, right? The only material cause is the individual's will. We are our own efficient cause. In the absence of a God, right? We create ourselves out of randomness through our will, right? And we give our will whatever form we want. If we want our will to take the form of a dutiful church-going meek person who says, yes, I shall turn the other cheek, right? Then Machiavelli says, go ahead and do that. You guys have been doing that the last 1,500 years. Or, he says, we can go back before the Christians, right? Who I Machiavelli now devastate, go back before the classical Greeks, right? Whose language I use, but whose imagination I will now devastate. And I say, we create our own form out of our own will. The only thing that really exists in the universe is our individual will. We create our own form with that will. And then we impose it on the rest of the world. That's all that there is. I want you to just think about that. No God, no telos, right? Nothing the church says, Matt. It's just you, the other guy, what you want. No. What you really want. Not the stuff at Sunday school. No. What you really want, man. Right? Because there's that other guy over there, and he's coming to terms with what he wants, man. And it may not be consistent with what you want at all, right? And there's the other guy, and the other guy, and the other guy, because Machiavelli is saying more and more of us are coming to terms with the reality that there is no order in the universe. There's only our will. And I'm going to impose mine on yours, whether you choose to try to impose yours on mine or not. That's up to you. I don't care. I'm imposing mine. And he who is the greater imposer of wills, that's the guy who we will call Prince. It's a new world. It's an absolutely new world. And what Machiavelli is saying is, yeah, you know, if you want to worship me and, you know, give me props for coming up with it, hey, that's fine. I'm big and bad. But look, don't miss the deeper message. I am not creating this. What I'm saying is that it's always been this way. I'm just stripping off the bullshit. Martin Luther, you know, a couple of thousand miles away, right around the same time as I'm stripping off a different layer of bullshit. And then King Henry VIII, right, whose chief of staff, Thomas Cromwell, that wasn't his title, but we would refer to him as his chief of staff, right-hand guy, right, his main couple, right, Thomas Cromwell, devout reader of Machiavelli's The Prince. He definitely got his hands on one, right? The influence of Machiavelli is perhaps impossible to state. But it's clear from writings of his contemporaries, even before either of his two most significant works were formally published in 1531. It's clear that before 1531, even before his death in 1517, people were coming to grips with what this guy from Florence, Niccolò Machiavelli, was saying. And it was just amazing. I was just a boy at the time. I barely remember his impact, you know, but from what I recall, people tripped out. But it's just profound. Again, you know, on its face, it's political, but deeper, what is he saying? There's no order to the universe. There's no God. And he's saying this in profoundly Catholic Italy, and probably the only way he could. He refers to Christianity as our religion, then he castigates it, right? He doesn't call Jesus a failure by name, but it's clear. But at the same time, he understands, right or wrong, he has an understanding of this intellectual innovation that he is imposing upon the world in profoundly Aristotelian terminology, right? Form, matter, but yet an absence of telos, right? Because, of course, after Aquinas falls in love with Aristotle in the 1200s, right? About 300 years later, 280 years later, you've got Machiavelli writing in a Europe that has been reintroduced to Aristotle, and so even as he blows away the Christian and the Greek classical intellectual models, he's very much operating from at least an Aristotelian one. He has to have some frame of a reference, right? You can't just blow away every prior intellectual tradition, because then what have you got, right? What I'm saying is he blows everything out except Aristotle, right? Why does he hang on to Aristotle? Because he's a materialist. He's a materialist, and he's a realist. That's where the term realpolitik comes from, right? So I think I'll leave it at that. But those are some of my what intrigued me as being some of the more important takeaways from Niccolò Machiavelli. If you were to check out Professor Smith's second Machiavelli lecture, you would hear toward the end that as he wraps up Machiavelli, he introduces the next great political philosopher in Stephen Smith's course at Yale, which is, of course, History of Political Philosophy, I think is the formal title. I think it's at Yale, I think it's still Philosophy 140, Introduction to Political Philosophy. The next great mind that, of course, Professor Smith tackles after Machiavelli is Thomas Hobbes. And he does so at the end of his second Machiavelli lecture by saying that it's not a coincidence, says Professor Smith, and I think he's right about this, that Thomas Hobbes is the next significant political philosopher, because Hobbes largely picks up where Machiavelli leaves off. Thomas Hobbes is a profound materialist. Thomas Hobbes is living in a world about 130 years after Machiavelli, in which the ancient oligarchy, divine right of kings, is really beginning to slip away, just as it had begun to slip away in Machiavelli's Italy. Thomas Hobbes now, in 1651, when he writes his classic Leviathan, is writing in a profoundly Machiavellian sense. He is writing as someone who no longer needs to justify the Machiavellian perspective, because the Machiavellian perspective on how politics just really works, not how we want it to work, but how it really works. Thomas Hobbes has completely bought into this. But what Hobbes needs to do is Hobbes needs to, from a Machiavellian perspective, he needs to maintain English order and stability by arguing for the continuation of the British monarchy. Okay, so Thomas Hobbes in 1651 is arguing for the continuation of the British monarchy. But he knows that one of his intellectual theos, Machiavelli, has created a whole new world. And now more and more people throughout Europe are looking at government and politics not as they could be in the city of God or in the form of the realms, but they are beginning to dare to think about how to make a government in this world with their hands, in accordance with their will. If Machiavelli's prince can have his own will and impose it on us, then why can't each of us have our own will and collectively impose it on the king? You see that? And Hobbes knows that more and more people are thinking about this. How does he know this? Because the King of England, on whose side Hobbes had just fought on in the British Civil War, I should define that. There have been more than a few. the English Civil War from 1642 to 1650 saw the King of England beheaded. Right? There was this clash in England between basically the king and kind of making Machiavelli right, a bunch of noblemen, right, who said, well, we want more power, right? There shouldn't be a government of the one, it should be the government of the few, right? So it was not a democratic revolution. It was a revolution by, a couple of dozen basically English big shots who wanted the king to let go of some of his power and give them more of his power, right? To hell with the poor people. Just give a reallocation of power from the king to a couple of dozen families. One, king is beheaded. And so from Hobbes's perspective, what Machiavelli has started is anarchy. Because now everybody thinks that they're entitled to the manifestation of their own individual will. And from Hobbes' perspective, all that leads is to chaos and brutality. And Hobbes says one problem, one mistake that the great Machiavelli made is in thinking that brutality can somehow be constrained. And Hobbes says, look, I just came out of war. I've seen shit. All right. You ever know anybody who, served in Nam or Afghanistan, they come back and they just kind of stare, right? It's like, hey, what's wrong with Tommy? Don't bother him. Don't bother him, man. He's seen shit. All right. What Thomas Hobbes is most afraid of is anarchy. He's not so much concerned about what's the right form of government. He's concerned about the total absence of government. Because Thomas Hobbes has just seen unbelievable atrocities, right? I mean, this is not warfare where a 19-year-old kid sits in the bunker underground in Nevada, pushes a button, right, on some video screen, and on the other side of the world, a wedding in Kabul is blown up. This is hand-to-hand, mano-a-mano, right? Brutal stuff. And so Thomas Hobbes wants to avoid an entire Europe gone mad, where everyone wants to overthrow their kings, which means that there's nothing but civil war. And from Thomas Hobbes' experience in the English Civil War, he is now convinced that we are all just homicidal maniacs and that we need a king in order to keep us from killing each other. And so Thomas Hobbes famously constructs what would later, particularly through the pens of John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, be known as the social contract. The social contract, the notion that government owes its legitimacy to the people. The people give the government its legitimacy. The people give the government its power. Therefore, the government owes something to the people. It's the basis of any democratic system. So before you can have democracy, you have to have perhaps some notion of a social contract that you and I, right, we help sustain this government. And so this government, therefore, owes something to us, right? We give this government its legitimacy, and so it owes us something in return. And Thomas Hobbes' notion of what our end, what we benefit from in the bargain of the social contract is very narrow. It's narrow, but perhaps it goes deep. Thomas Hobbes says, we tolerate, in his mind and in his world, an oligarchical, meaning run by a king. We tolerate an oligarchical or monarchical government. Why? Because in the absence of a strong king, the homicidal maniacs that we are, at our essence, we would kill each other. And so it's in our own self-interest to tolerate the existence of a strong king. Take a look at the social contract, the 13-slide PowerPoint, and a very quick, like 6-minute discussion of Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau. In 3080, we get into it. We'll just scratch the surface here. Because I hope it's covered in 3080, whoever you had it with, at least to some degree, probably not to the degree I do, because I love this stuff. But B, because even if not in 3080, hopefully we've been exposed to to this in some regard. But what Hobbes is saying is that government's legitimacy comes from the people. That's brand new, right? The 1600s, the notion that the government derives its proper legitimacy from its own people, that is innovative. But what I think it perhaps is even more rocking is this implication of what Thomas Hobbes is saying in his Leviathan. We establish, or at least tolerate, this government because it's in our self-interest to have law and order, right? We establish a government basically to protect us from each other, okay? And it's our own, what we see as being in our own best interest, our own self-interest. That's the real innovative part. It's not just that government owes its allegiance to the people, that government is given its power by the people. It's that the people establish it in the first instance on the basis of what's in it for me. Why do I establish this government? Now, the way I think of it is Thomas Hobbes, not unlike Machiavelli, knows that he's got one foot in each era, right? He's got one foot in an old era that's going away. And he's seen what can happen when the new generation, right, tries to create a new reality. They kill the king and everything goes to hell. And so Thomas Hobbes is a true conservative, right? We need to conserve the old way of being, right? The new generation, they don't even know what they want yet. They know they want the king dead, but then what? You know? And so he says, no, man, all these young guys have proven is what I've been saying all along. We're homicidal maniacs. We need a strong king to keep law and order. But it would only take about 38 years. A fellow Britishman, John Locke, would come along and say, you know, Hobbes, you got PTSD, right? You saw some shit in the war. I get it. It's understandable, but that don't make you right. Look, John Locke, say, yeah, government derives its legitimacy from us. Thomas Jefferson would later, a great lover of Locke, would later literally say, we the people. John Locke didn't quite say that, right? But I'm trying to establish the connection from Machiavelli to Hobbes, right? And from Hobbes to guys like Locke, and then from Locke to guys like Thomas Jefferson. There's a through line here. Does Thomas Jefferson believe everything that Hobbes did? No. Even Hobbes didn't believe everything that Machiavelli says. But what I'm saying is that the way I describe this in other contexts is, particularly in modernity, perhaps, where maybe the stakes are higher and the practitioner somewhat more sophisticated. The big moves in history are like moves on a chessboard. Okay, you ever played chess before? Right. So where you are at any given moment on the chessboard is really a result of all the previous moves. Okay, so your knight is positioned where it is, right? And if you go one step forward and then either step diagonally, right? That is your next move. That is the move of the knight, right? And that next move, right, may be quite the winning move for you. But my point is that you had to get the knight not to where it's going, but to where it is right now in the first instance, right? You probably gave up a bishop or a rook, a couple of pawns, maybe even a queen to get your horsey into place for checkmate. All these great guys in history, they inherited their place on the chessboard. Somebody before them made certain moves. And now they are where they are. Okay? Thomas Hobbes could not make that kind of move in 1651, I suggest to you, if Machiavelli hadn't suggested, well, hey, this is the way politics is really played. John Locke couldn't make the move that he makes in 1689 if 38 years prior, Thomas Hobbes doesn't say, you know, government derives its authority from us, and that's why we should continue to have a king. John Locke comes along and says, Hobbes, you're right. Government derives its authority from us. But it doesn't necessarily follow that that means that we should have a king. A king may or may not be in our own best interest. So John Locke makes a tremendous move. His move is government derives its justification from us because we make a decision in our own self-interest to make sure that our stuff is protected. Because when we do throw down with one another, John Locke says, it's almost always over stuff. You want my stuff. I want their stuff. They wanted their stuff. That's why they went to war. So John Locke says, your analysis is incomplete, brother. We covet. We covet big time. We want something that somebody else has. And we ain't necessarily prepared to work for it. Even Aquinas knew that, man. All right? So no, Hobbes, we're not all homicidal maniacs, man. But we do want our stuff protected. And after 1492, there's more and more bling to be had. Okay? Right? So we established government in order to protect our stuff. First came private property, right? And then when we began to acquire private property, it occurred to us, hey, this is righteous, man. I feel fulfilled by this, right? Whether I got religion in my life or not, whether I believe in a God or not, whether there is a God or not, this bling can be quite self-actualizing. Thank you very much. Don't mess with it. Okay, so someone else comes and mess with it. Shit, now I got to go kick his ass, right? Maybe I don't want to. Maybe I can't. We establish government so that the government can go and kick that guy's ass and bring us back our stuff. That is essentially John Locke's message. John Locke, 1689. The first treatise of government is terrific stuff. It's the second treatise of government where Locke really thinks it through a little bit more. 1689, John Locke. Chapter 5 of the second treatise of government. The title of the chapter is On Property. It's right after chapter 4, which is on slavery, where John Locke has to nuance his way around why he thinks slavery in some cases is okay. What's his answer? It's basically Aristotle's. In a way, Aristotle is the great early justifier of slavery. So after John Locke gets through with his tortured explanation of why the commodification of the human being might be okay, he dispenses with that, and now he gets to what he really wants to talk about, chapter 5, on property. And that is where Locke says, we establish government in order to protect our life, liberty, and estate. Sound familiar? One of the great adorers of John Locke, Thomas Jefferson, right? 87 years later, in the Declaration of Independence, would say that we establish government in order to protect our life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Practically cuts and pastes verbatim from John Locke's second treatise on government. Now, a bit of a side note. So Thomas Jefferson says life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. John Locke in second treatise says life, liberty, and estate. So what's the change? Jefferson certainly could have used estate, and you know, the other guys in Philadelphia might have said, you fucking plagiarizer, man. That's John. We all read John Locke. We love John Locke, right? We're all Lockean. This is America. We're Lockean. We are beginning a profoundly Lockean political construct here in America. He could have just taken it verbatim. Jefferson changes it. Is it a distinction without a difference? It may be, because what Jefferson is saying is that by the time you get to the late 1700s, it's Lockeans' imagination of the emancipating power of private property is so commonplace, is so taken for granted, that now all Jefferson has to say is happiness. It's just understood. Happiness now is equated with the ownership of private stuff. Life, liberty, and estate like estate planning, right? What's in your estate, your portfolio, your holdings, your assets, right? John Locke. We establish government to protect our life, liberty, and our estate. And Jefferson, who has no small estate himself, right? He's a profound plantation owner, and quote unquote at owner of more than a few human beings. We now understand with at least one of which he had children. Thomas Jefferson doesn't need to say estate. He just says, you know what I'm talking about, man. We know what makes us happy. We establish government, or we're gonna, when King George's ass, we're establishing government here in these United States to protect our life, our liberty, and our pursuit of happiness. Jefferson ain't possible without Locke. Locke ain't possible without Hobbes. I don't think Hobbes is possible without Machiavelli, right? Some guy opened up, if you guys play chess, I'm not saying I play it well, some guy opened up the rook, right? Moves his knight. Now he's able to move his castle, right? There goes the bishop diagonally, right? Crisscrossing the board, right? And after a few moves, right? You've got the American War of Independence. And for the first time in 2,000 years, the reestablishment of some form of democracy. Because before the United States, you outside of a few plebiscites in Judea, Jerusalem, some other places, you have to go back to Athens to find anything so closely resembling a full-blown democracy. So what in the hell happened in between, right? If democracy is so bitchin', why didn't we just pick it up right after the fall of Greece? This is why. Guys needed to make their moves, right? The world that you and I have inherited, this didn't happen. This didn't happen overnight, nor is it necessarily the result of just a handful of guys, nor is it necessarily the result of intended consequences. Plato makes a move. Aristotle makes a move. Jesus comes along. Augustine makes his move. Aquinas makes his move and incorporates some Aristotelian thought, right? Machiavelli says, fuck all that preceding stuff, right? And says, this is what's really been happening under this layer of bullshit. And now, for better or worse, but I will argue increasingly in coming lectures, the notion of virtue, the Platonic, Aristotelian, Aquinian notion of virtue, the moral question, becomes increasingly less vital and central after Machiavelli. Machiavelli makes it safe for the modern politician to pretend to care about virtue, just as he pretends to be the pious individual in those political jurisdictions where constituents still look to piety to some particular deity, right? But Machiavelli creates the modern world. where it is necessary and proper to truly understand what's going on, to look at matters on their face, but also to investigate deeper, right? To do what Socrates got himself killed for, to go up to the powerful person and say, why did you really take this vote? I know what you said. I know what you said. We all heard what you said. Why did you really take this vote? And so for those reasons, when Professor Smith suggests that Niccolò Machiavelli really makes the modern world, is the inventor of the modern political state, and perhaps as one of the great political theorists of the last century, Leo Strauss, who wrote a very important book on specifically on Machiavelli. Leo Strauss, very right-wing conservative, brilliant right-wing conservative guy. Leo Strauss suggests that perhaps Machiavelli is himself, more than any other single person in history, the founder of modernity itself. Take a